Hello and welcome to the EuroHealth Podcast. My name is Jiři Svoboda, and in this podcast we discuss key healthcare topics in the European Union. Our guest today is Professor Ernest Groman, professor at medical faculty at the University of Vienna and scientific director of the Vienna Nicotine Institute. Professor, welcome.
Hello, good morning.
So it's good to know that you've been on this podcast already 3 years ago, in fact, so we will have some topics to reflect on. So your expertise relates to tobacco control, smoking cessation, and harm reduction principles. So in the first interview we had in this podcast with you, you mentioned discussions about harm reduction applied to tobacco are sensitive for political reasons. Has it become easier to speak with policymakers in the last 3 years about harm reduction principles?
Well, it depends to whom you speak, of course, and where you speak and in which country. I guess in Austria it might even get more complicated because we have a little regulation, especially for nicotine pouches, and so there are all the advertisement around in the city, and people start to question it, especially some politicians and some health personnel, usually little informed about the whole stuff, but say it's not good if you have an advertisement. Yes, that's right. But on the other side, we have to have a chance to inform people, of course, in the correct way, not targeting children or minor populations, but to tell them, well, we have something which is less harmful, and if you do not want or are not able to quit smoking, you can try this instead. And we also have a lot of misconceptions in the population. You must say, I met a friend and he said, "Yes, Ernest, you are talking all the time about these things. I assume everything is equally harmful." And then I looked at him and said, "No, it is not." And then he was angry with me. Of course, you know your friends. You say, if you do best is you agree. For the young listeners here, best is you agree, then you do not produce dissonance and friendship. Days, you know? Okay.
But it almost sounds like there is sort of a drawback, right, in applying or talking about harm reduction principles.
It's so and so, yeah. On one side, more people know about the topic, they know that it exists. On the other side, you have more people being against, and it's a little bit like a pendulum. You must imagine, first everything was unregulated, yes, and now regulation starts, and then you have the issue. If you are a regulator, you can just make something wrong, yeah. So you are usually very carefully and against a lot of things. And then, of course, we have the politics which are coming in, different political parties, and then we also have our bureaucrats. And honestly, sometimes you get the impression everyone is cooking his own soup, as we say in Austria, and they care least about the smokers in the end, yeah? So it's everyone is pulling on his string, and the smokers are somewhere in the middle, in between. Yeah.
So I think last time on this podcast you put it quite bluntly. The bottom line is that people are still dying from smoking cigarettes. It is as simple as that. I'm wondering, are we winning this fight over time? Do you think has it become easier to stop smoking in recent years?
It depends on the smoker, of course, yeah. So we always had the idea, and we also did some publications on it. Usually, when you have a group of smokers and you put pressure on them, like all these restrictions, you must not smoke in the garage, you must not smoke in the office, you must not smoke in somewhere there. And if you also have the social discrimination, usually those people who are less dependent quit because they are annoyed. They say, "No, how should I do this now?" And I quit. On the other side, we found out several years ago the dependence level of the remaining smokers population is increasing. So we assume it will be more difficult for the remaining smokers to quit. in the end. So you get in the end, you in the very end, if it ever happens, you will get the hardcore smoker population, which might be a little bit. Please apologize also the listeners, but it might be quite similar to addicts from other drugs. Yeah,
I see.
Because these are the mentally unstable and those with high dependence, they will, of course, they have the biggest issues to quit. Especially if the dependence levels goes up, you need substitution for smokers. And here, I want to stress, because we found some tendency that the people in some public departments, so to say, switch from smoke-free to nicotine-free. And maybe it has the reason there are not so many medical doctors there, also in our health department, so to say. And so a lot of lawyers, and the medical doctors here we were talking about, honestly, they beat me 20 years, So people who are living in the past will not realize that time is changing, And so it has switched somehow from smoke-free to nicotine-free. Now, when we look at addiction, in many addictions, you replace even the substance people are consuming to give them a safer possibility to consume it. And here, with smoking, we feel it different. We say, no, we forbid it, we outlaw it. No, he has to stop. And then something, yes, but he is addicted, and usually you would be able to solve many problems in nowadays. For example, the diabetics, they just have to eat less. The alcoholics just have to drink less or quit drinking alcohol. So, but in health style and in there is no easy solution for the topic. Also, we want it and we do not understand it, because also we medical doctors, we see the smoker, he has a lung disease and he is smoking all day, and we cannot understand why is he not quitting, and the answer is because he is addicted to nicotine.
Right. So let's get back to sort of a policy making in this regard. And in recent developments, the European Council adopted a non-binding recommendation on smoke-free environment. Among the main measures, the text mentions extending smoke and aerosol-free environment policies to key outdoor areas as well. Well, given what you say, I think many smokers might just say, first it was indoors, offices, bus stops. Now it's outdoors, playgrounds. Where does it end? Is it desirable to leave some places still open for smoking?
Well, personally, I think these are side places, and as a politician, you can get attention if you focus, and it's unproblematic. Of course, as a medical doctor, you cannot be against restrictions. I cannot say, no, I am against this, because, of course, we know if you reduce availability, you reduce consumption. But honestly, from a personal opinion, I think nowadays it gets somehow ridiculous. When I started, I told you before, we had some chat before, people were smoking everywhere. And when you told them, well, maybe you shouldn't smoke in the room where your children are sleeping, they looked at you and said, what do you really think? And now, and this has completely switched. Even we have many smokers who do not smoke inside, we use the balcony and so on. This was not 20 years ago, it was no topic, they were smoking everywhere. And now, there will be one day when these activists will have no possibility to restrict anything further, because everything is forbidden. So in my personal opinion, it gets sometimes a little bit ridiculous.
So what does the science say in this regard? So this recommendation is aimed for reducing the harms of secondhand smoking. So what does science say? Is the secondhand smoking outside as harmful as secondhand smoking inside?
Well, honestly, it's quite difficult and nearly impossible to do such a study inside, yes, because you need a long-term exposure. And you can remember it needed 30 years to establish the risk of smoking, cigarette smoking. And for example, we would have to look at for 30 years, the amount of passive smoke which is inhaled, and then you would need a control group. So I would say outside it's impossible to do a really serious scientific study. On the other side, I have to agree, maybe smokers disturb other people sometimes. Because if you are standing outside, and for example, for a phone call, then maybe you also disturb other people, by the way. But then you have a guy who is smoking heavily beside you. There's also some annoyance, by the way. But the health effect, I would say, they are negligible. I would like to see a study who proves that smoking outside is damaging the health through second-hand and maybe third-hand smoke.
So what you're saying basically that this kind of recommendation has like no science basis?
Well, it might have some science basis because if you reduce availability, you reduce consumption. So if the people have no possibilities to smoke, then they smoke less. But on the other side, it's somehow unfair vis-a-vis heavy dependent smokers, so to say. If someone smokes 30, 40 cigarettes a day, now he is running through, if it's a big office building, so his office building to get outside, and then there's also a restriction. You do not do this with other drugs, by the way, with other psychoactive substances, yeah? For example, I have never seen an intercontinental flight where no alcohol is served, yes? But you expect people not to smoke. If you're flying business class, you can arrive completely drunken in New York, by the way. And it's no issue, yeah? And by the way, you are also disturbing usually, not always, because, you know, with alcohol, the reactions of people are drunken quite different. But usually, you also disturb other passengers here, yeah? If you are drunk, especially if you're the aggressive type, who gets nasty when he's drunken, yeah?
All right. So this recommendation also says that its purpose is to denormalize and discourage the use of tobacco and emerging products. These emerging products, so like vapes or heated tobacco products, are becoming, of course, fairly popular. Again, like what does the science say? Is it reasonable to put equal measures for cigarettes and vapes and heated tobacco products?
No, it is not, but it's easier, of course. Then you do not have different regulations, and you can play copy. If you're a bureaucrat, you can play copy-paste with your computer. You know, we have these rules we apply to everything. But honestly, I think the product should be regulated according to their harm and also taxed according to their harm. So it's not, we would be able in theory, if we make a good information for the population, and if we find a good taxation model that we move the smokers from cigarettes to the alternative products, and might be able to save thousands of lives. Right. But of course, you always have this, you know, these intellectuals, yeah, you know, but he says always, but maybe there will smoke more people, then maybe there is something. We have no long-term study. We have no long-term study in any new medication we develop. You cannot get long-term data if you do not use the product. So these are sometimes the killer arguments, you know. Right. I have no good example from usual life. You find it everything. Also, if you have young listeners, you know, when I was young, there was always everyone saying, we have never done this before, and we did this always differently, and why should we change anything? So
so this topic is also interesting because according to the recent Eurobarometer study, more than 1/3 of e-cigarette users say that they started vaping to stop or reduce tobacco consumption. 36% of them, in fact, according to this Eurobarometer. So these numbers would lead me to believe that it's in fact desirable to still not regulate vapes and e-cigarettes as much as normal cigarettes, boxed ones.
Well, we have a certain population of decision makers and also bureaucrats who think they can outlaw everything. And the first here, not myself, sorry, my former chief, heard this argument first in 1969 in the US, where they say we do not need any replacement, we will outlaw everything. And you know what happens? People are still smoking cigarettes, and we always, especially in drugs, have the idea in some, usually or often abstinent people who believe, maybe who are so stable that they do not need any enhancement for the short term, who believe that they can outlaw anything. And so, it's not true. It also does not work with illegal drugs, by the way. The Americans are doing a war on drugs and still using drugs. And people have always used psychoactive substances to improve their mood, and if we like it or not, for the last 4,000 years, and just because I want them to be clean from everything. And then is the issue, which psychoactive substance does little harm compared to another, because I saw an article from California, and they say, yes, alcohol consumption is completely unchic there, but they consume mushrooms and blah, blah, blah. So I say, well, and now it's better. I'm not sure about it. It's more fashionable in the special group. Okay.
So this recommendation which we are talking about, if member states of the European Union were to implement this recommendation, banning smoking and vaping as well in key outdoor areas, how does this affect people who are wishing to quit smoking?
Now, of course, you give a reminder, by the way. Of course, this might be possible. We have seen, also with the restriction in office buildings, we earned a lot of money with smoking cessation programs in companies, by the way, because they wanted to offer them something when they forbid or outlawed smoking inside. So I was not completely against it, so to say. But it's a side. We regulate everything, but we do not try to help the people directly who are consuming this. And if fortunately I'm not a politician, and I am not doing really politics, but you need a topic, you need to be re-elected, and usually you do something which people, or you believe people will understand, and of course then you say something what is quite logical, that smokers should not smoke in front of children. But it does not tackle the real program. Maybe it fits to a package, but we miss the relevant things here.
I think one of the arguments that maybe often policymakers use when they implement such like large-scale bans on every nicotine product, let's say in one bracket, they might say that it's for protecting the children and protecting people who are not smoking yet. Do you think this is a reasonable assumption, like that when you ban vaping, smoking altogether at once, young people will not even get to the habit of smoking?
We have to say, of course, if you reduce the availability, you reduce consumption. This is everywhere, not just with smoking. It's with alcohol. It's with maybe even with some drinks, with sugar, with I don't know. But children have always been a killer argument here. Yeah, and I think it's a very, many of us have children. I have 2 daughters, and it's a very emotional topic. And we have this frontal cortex, which is very new, and then we have this old emotional core inside of our brain, and every logic disappears if the emotions go in. And children are used here like as a killer argument and of course you have solved the issue. Yeah. For example, we always say you have in prevention, you have to start in school. Every song tells me you have to start in school. School is the terriblest setting for doing anything in prevention, because you have young people in front of sitting in front of someone older who tells them what to do, and then comes the next person and tells them not to smoke. Yeah, right. It is, and everyone says it's the best place, but one group does not agree. And these are the teachers. Yeah. Some of my former students got teachers of biology, so I get sometimes some reports from school, and so we have every one of us have some ideal picture in his mind, and then on the other side you have reality, and you try to avoid reality. Yeah, and if you have tried it one time, you will see the school setting does not work very well. But of course, if you're sitting and the same here is with smoking, you think smoking will be solved, even if you forbid everything. Usually, then you have the development of a black market, then you have development of black money, so to say, which is used for different activities, which also might not legal. So you put it all in a new circle of, and usually, for example, if one can smuggle cigarettes, he might even smuggle other things if there's a possibility. Right. If you have the infrastructure and the business model, so to say, even if it's criminal, then if you smoke cigarettes, if you smuggle cigarettes, you might also smuggle other things. Yeah.
Right. So on a more positive note now, we have, of course, countries in the European Union which made significant progress in reducing the amount of population which smokes. Sweden, for instance, now there only 5.3% of the population there smokes. It's quite remarkable progress they've made. My question is then, can this kind of progress be replicated in other countries? Can this kind of progress be seen in other member states? Is it even possible?
We published this approximately 25 years ago, and we stressed that this is possible in other countries. You must imagine in Sweden we have the biggest epidemiological experiment, which is done by the population itself, so to say. So they consume snus and nicotine pouches instead of cigarettes. So we publish it, they consume the same amount of nicotine as the Austrians, but the Austrians smoke cigarettes, and the Swedish male population has the best health data, maybe even in the whole European Union. And what is quite interesting, and I tried to look it up, we have this phenomena of neglection of this. So how do I say it in English? It has not to be what must not be, you know?
I see,
Yeah, so, and the people simply don't talk about it, also responsible or neglect it and say, no, yes, it's some strange Swedish behavior. And then so, yes, well, but they have the lowest lung cancer rates, and they have the lowest mouth cancer rates, and they have the lowest cancer rates, and they're a very healthy population. Also, they consume a lot of nicotine. Yeah, then people that shut their ears. Yeah, it's interesting. So maybe there must be some description, because this happens also with other topics. If this neglection of something which I do not want to have, and so I simply ignore it. Is there a name for it? I don't know.
Not sure.
Okay.
But anyways, like I'm maybe interested in more like how did this happen in Sweden? Because was it always like this, or is it where the population also smoking there before cigarettes?
Yeah, of course. And snus, this is nicotine pouches which contain tobacco, which was the primal form, which was ridiculously outlawed in the European Union because they said we do not want to have another tobacco product. So we have many scurrilities. But you must imagine, if the topic is not like it is, we would have solved it a long time ago. But back to the top. In Sweden, it was a traditional thing. Some people say because they like ships and there's a lot of ships in sea, you cannot smoke very good if everything is very wet. So they use the form of tobacco which they put in their mouth. And in the beginning, in the 50s, I guess it was a blue-collar thing. So workers' class people were using it, but it changed during the last decades, and so now it's a white-collar thing. People realize that smoking is not good, and I have to apologize with the ladies. First, the men realized and substituted the cigarette consumption with snus, and so we have here an epidemiological experiment which comes from the population itself. Yeah, so you have no primary researcher here, but on the other side, some of my colleagues do not really realize it. We also have no limitation here because everyone is exposed. Everyone can choose what he's consuming. So this is a study which includes a whole population. Yeah, this never happens elsewhere. And maybe what's also but some might say yes, but it's limited to the Swedish population. Yes, that's true. And maybe other populations might be different. You always have the intellectual who says, but. Yeah?
Right.
So we do not try, but we do discuss. And usually in our region, we like to have long sentences with long.
I see.
Okay.
One of the measures, like one of the harm reduction measures that you mentioned last time in this podcast, or one of the most effective measures was taxation. So, like, I'm wondering whether, for instance, making snus, nicotine pouches, with lower taxes compared to cigarettes, would this, for instance, help the adaptation of the snus in the population?
Of course, we see the most effective thing to give consumption direction is the price. So, if maybe I'm not a professor of economics, by the way. Also, we did a publication on it. Maybe some of them hate me now. But of course, you would, in principle, but you have to try hard. Yeah, you would be able to put consumption in the right direction if you increase the taxation on cigarettes. And so to say, it's not the taxation itself; it's the price for the consumer. The consumer, if he buys this product, does not care if it's taxed 70% as now or 80%. It's the price. But if the price of cigarettes at the shops is higher than of, for example, nicotine pouches or e-cigarettes, then of course it will be interesting for people to switch to the other products, also to save money. Sometimes I have the impression some also have different ideas. So of course, if you increase the Yeah, but maybe I understand the financial department. You need the money, and you see there's a new product, and now we get what we are able to get. But then we shouldn't stress always this health in all policies thing, which is a blah blah blah. In fact, it's maybe we should call it money in all politics. It would be more honest, yeah. But if we want to try to do something for the health of the population, those new products, so nicotine pouches, e-cigarettes, and even tobacco heaters shouldn't at least not be more expensive than cigarettes. Yeah.
Right. So, European Beating Cancer Plan is now in force. One of its main goal is to achieve tobacco-free generation by 2040. That is where less than 5% of the EU population uses tobacco products. Do you think this is a realistic goal?
Well, I have been at Smoke-Free Generation 2020 and 2030, and maybe I hope I will survive 2060. Yeah, no, this is too old. Like I said, I'm now 55 now. I'm maybe now 20. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's the first time I was in an event like this. I do not tell you where. There were a lot of people. I was very young, and they were all much older than myself, and they were talking about smoke-free 2020, where nobody will smoke everywhere or elsewhere. And I was thinking, and then I asked him, maybe I will be around 2020, but when I look in this round, I might be the only one. They were angry with me, yeah? Because it's easy to tell. I know this was disrespectful, but I was young. But, it's easy to give some direction for, and, politics are very short-living nowadays. It's easy to say in 2040 we will be smoke-free because, you are long retired. And, of course, everybody has forgotten what you told them. But on the other side, to stay positive, you give it some direction, and it's some declaration of will or plan where you want to come or want to go. So, yeah, but you shouldn't take it too seriously, honestly. So we are doing a podcast here, so I'm telling what I really think. Maybe.
Right. And that's we appreciate that very much, of course. And so what do you think if this Beating Cancer Plan is successful in matching its goal? Let's say, what do you think is the place of nicotine after 2040 in the European Union? What is your prediction? Will we see, for instance, more people using snus, more healthier alternatives? What do you wish to see in 15 years from now?
I think the days of burning tobacco should be over and inhaling it, and we need a cleaner form of nicotine consumption. For our first listeners, in cigarettes you have 5,000 substances, or maybe 7,000. It depends on the measurements, how exact you can measure it, and you have at least 30 carcinogens. Of course, you can also find 70 carcinogens, also depending on the measurements. And everyone who has some, look in the view would say it's an advantage if you do not consume all these carcinogens, but you stay with nicotine alone. Nicotine is not cancer, has no cancer risk, so to say. But of course, it makes it addictive. Yeah, so if you get used to it, it might be quite difficult to stop. But so to say, we also have other drugs, for example, caffeine.
Of course,
most consumed psychoactive drug is caffeine, and nobody cares about it, so to say. But it's nicotine. And so I think we will see a switch to less harmful products, which are not burning. The question which is remaining in which what will be the tempo of this, and this depends on the information to the population. if I tell them everything is equally harmful, then of course they will not consider to switch. And then of course it depends on the price and on the information and what we tell them. So I think the politicians and also the scientists, we have a real responsibility here, and should.
Right.
Sometimes we do this topic also here, but it's a very serious topic, in fact.
It's good to mention also, and that will be my last question. So very shortly, that smoking is not cancer. It doesn't equal. Smoking is also risk factor to a lot of cardiovascular diseases, and some member states and NGOs have been calling for creation of such a plan similar to Europe's Beating Cancer Plan in the area of cardiovascular diseases. Just very shortly, is this a plan you would support? Is this a good initiative, you think?
In principle, yes, because it's often forgotten. Especially, I can remember reading publications in cardiology talking a lot about cholesterol and LDL and HDL, and do not mention smoking or smoking yes, no. And of course, we know there is a big difference if someone is smoking 2 cigarettes per day, or like our biggest smoker to say he was smoking 120 cigarettes per day. He was just sleeping for hours. Otherwise, but you know, you can imagine this is different for your heart, so to say. And if you do not look at this in publications, it would be necessary at least to do carbon monoxide measurements. But we ask for this since 20 years. Sometimes again, but maybe sometime it will be included, and maybe we have also to write some publications in cardiology in a new way. I'm not a cardiologist, but if you do not recognize the dose inside the consumption of one of the biggest risk factor, or just rate it with yes and no, and you measure cholesterol very with a scale, you know. Right. Then something is going wrong. But on the other side, we will see what happens. It should be included, of course.
All right. Professor Groman, thank you very much for the discussion, and best of luck with your next work. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.